fervently waiting for has finally arrived. It's time for TMI, Confessionals of the Nerd Kind. And now, your hosts, Jeff Nerfherder Chandler, Jim Kaiju Baker,
and Christina Yojimbo Henry. You can continue.
And now, let's get on with the show. Here is TMI.
So I gotta tell you this funny story. I'm watching Evil Dead on Friday night with my son, who is 16, who's never seen it before. And because we've been doing this project this month, getting him all caught up on all the classic
Now,
horror
has he
movies.
seen Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness?
No.
No.
We're starting from the beginning. Yeah.
Okay.
I almost wanted to just skip to Evil Dead 2 because it's basically a better remake of the first movie, and it's my favorite anyway. We're like, okay, we'll go back to the first one. So we're watching it. And do you remember the scene where Ash, later after he's killed Linda, he like reaches into his pocket, and there's like this close up on the corduroys, and he takes out the stupid necklace that he
Mhm.
gave her that he's, recovered from her body. And it's like, so there's a close up on the pocket, and his hands are going in there, and my son goes in a Gollum voice, "What has it got in its pockets?" I was like, I'm never going to be able to watch this again.
Now, I do agree that Evil Dead 2 is kind of like a leaner, faster, better remake
same plot.
reinvention of the first one. I think that's maybe to bring in a wider audience. If they've never seen the first one, you can, it brings you up to speed with everything, in the first 10 minutes of Evil Dead 2. But there is like a visceral power to the first Evil Dead that's not really there in the other two.
I mean, they were trying to make a straightforward horror movie. It wasn't like Evil Dead 2 where like all their Three Stooges sensibilities start to come in, and even more so in Army of Darkness where it's like nonstop dad jokes, so it's more of a straightforward horror movie. But also I think the thing that's really interesting is that Sam Raimi's style was already there at 19. Like, that is a Sam Raimi movie. You can tell when you watch it. Like, all of the hallmarks of the Sam Raimi style are already there, present in the movie.
Including torturing Bruce. Now, Bruce wasn't Bruce yet. So that's another reason that the first Evil Dead kind of plays harder than the other two, because Bruce is like a superhero already in Evil Dead 2, and especially in Army of Darkness. But he's just another one of the cast in the first Evil Dead.
And by Evil Dead 2, Sam had his brother to torment.
Yeah.
So. Poor Ted in the basement.
Ooh, Henrietta. Yeah. When does Ted stop and Henrietta begin? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I still enjoy watching the first one, although it is to a degree colored because I've read Bruce's biography, I've watched the commentary, and you can't help but think of all the stories about the making of the film and
the release of the film, and that's one of the great aspects of that biography. If you're at all interested in the nitty-gritty of filmmaking, then all that behind the first Evil Dead was fascinating to me.
And, I don't know if you ever got around to reading Don Coscarelli's biography,
No.
True Indie, but same sort of thing where, Coscarelli and, Sam Raimi and all these guys, they sort of came from, and this is, again, it's relevant to what we're going to talk about today, because our first film is definitely an homage to the era of DIY filmmaking. They all were out there trying so hard to make something great on like these micro budgets with, amateur actors. And like, it's amazing what an impact they have. Think about it. They didn't have digital cameras. They had to buy, canisters of film. They had to like get these things developed and printed and released
Yeah.
into, it was such a different
And
process.
somehow get the money to buy all this stuff, just short of going door to door and begging.
Which is certainly what happened on the first Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Because they famously, like, they would film and then they would run out of money and then they would go around and look for more money and then they would film some more.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can picture like Bruce and Sam putting soot on each other's faces before they ring the doorbell and putting on the fingerless gloves.
Please, sir. Yeah.
So I'm very excited about today's episode because I know that you saw X a long time ago, months ago. I don't know if you watched it again.
I did.
For this? You did.
Okay. Just to refresh.
Yeah. So it was the first time watch for me this week, and then followed up, 2 days later with Pearl. And wow, talk about swinging for the fences in terms of filmmaking. This really excited me. It got my juices flowing, especially Pearl, in a way that movies very rarely do, as I get older. But we'll get there. Do we have any news? Would you like to bring anything up, or do you want to just get right into it?
I don't have any specific news, no.
No.
I do want to. I did when we saw Pearl, we saw it at the Music Box, and there was a preview. I am excited about this. There was a preview for Decision to Leave, which is the new Park Chan-wook film. He's a Korean director. If you're familiar with him at all, you've seen Old Boy maybe, or Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. He did The Handmaiden. He actually hasn't directed a film since The Handmaiden, so this is so exciting.
When was The Handmaiden released?
6 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's quite a while ago. It stars Park Hae-il, who's also in Memories of Murder and The Host. He's the younger brother in The Host, the former student who makes the bombs at the end. It's going to be out in a couple of weeks, and I don't know if you'll be able to go see it around where you are.
We'll see. I don't know. Yeah. It's very, the schedule at my local is very strange post COVID because the movies appear that you would never think would play in Poughkeepsie, New York. But so it's a possibility. Who knows?
Well, and I'm hoping, because the early buzz is like, oh, this is like your new Korean thriller if you loved Parasite. So hopefully Parasite will be able to lift this movie a little bit and get it like a little bit more of a wider release, which I would like in general, because as you know, I'm a fan of Korean film.
Of course. Yeah. All right. Well, X.
Yes.
Let's get into it.
Yes. May I just say, this is a good week for Jeff not to be here.
Yes. Although, I don't think that they're, in terms of gore or frights per se, Jeff would have a problem with. I think it's the disturbing factor.
Yeah.
More so with our second feature than our first feature, which is much more straight ahead kind of horror. And as you said, an homage, almost shot for shot in some cases. And I think the one that comes to mind especially is, of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, from the locale and the van and the time period.
And when the first thing they do is stop at an isolated gas station.
Of course. I'm like, okay, where's the old man that's going to come into this later? They didn't go that far.
It really feels like an homage to Chainsaw. I felt that when I first saw the preview. It's not as gory, I think, as maybe the preview implies that it will be. Although there's a couple of pretty gory
there's some good ones. There's some good ones in there.
But I think what's interesting about this period, because it doesn't just feel like an homage to sort of DIY horror, but also a little bit of a love letter to like the porno chic era of American filmmaking. It's interesting because I've literally just heard 2 podcasts talking about this recently. One was an episode of You're Wrong About, talking about Deep Throat. And then another one, I mentioned You Must Remember This last week. She happened to do an episode as the start of her erotic 80s series talking about the period just before that, where erotic film, X-rated films were considered like popular film and they were released widely, and like people went to see them in the theaters, and it was considered some kind of art. And this sort of porno chic period is considered from like roughly 1969 to 1984, when home video really takes hold.
Now, wait a second. Is porno chic really a thing, or did somebody just like make that up since X has come out?
No. That was a term that was actually used around the time like Deep Throat and like Behind the Green Door came out. Yeah, it was like some journalist.
That's like a very seedy underground insider term.
That was the whole thing, is that it wasn't considered seedy. It was considered like daring filmmaking. It was artistic. It wasn't just about getting people off. And you see a little bit of this in RJ's character in X, where he keeps talking about how it's possible to make it an artistic, smutty movie, right? And he's like, I'm going to make art. He keeps talking about cinema, and he keeps he has this kind of earnestness about the movie that they're making, which is clearly not art.
Before we get into this, I just have to say, just reacting from what you were telling me about the podcasts that this topic has come up on, I just feel bad for the person that tunes into You Must Remember This, expecting to hear something about Humphrey Bogart, and then all of a sudden going into a Deep Throat.
Well, she is pretty clear what the topic of the episode is going to be about.
Right.
You can read the title ahead of time.
Okay,
so
good.
If that's not
good.
your thing, then,
yeah.
But actually, it's a pretty fascinating series that she did, talking about this porno chic era in one episode. And then she kind of goes almost year by year through the 80s, talking about the rise of these, she calls it erotic 80s. And there's like these sort of erotic thrillers that became very popular in that era. And then like the teen sex comedy, which became very, very popular because of Porky's. It's pretty fascinating if you sort of lived through that era to see how she breaks it down kind of year by year. Sort of relevant to this only because this is set in 1979. So
Right.
sort of the waning years of the porno chic era.
Now, is X rated R, funnily enough? Now, when this first came out, I wasn't entirely sure if it was NC-17 or not. And just reading the synopsis of what the plot was, I'm like, whoa, this sounds a little bit hardcore in more ways than one. So maybe this is not my cup of tea, but it doesn't really go there. It gives you just enough for what the title is implying.
Right.
For anybody that's looking for that type of thing to, I think, satisfy that, but also the horror fans. But
it's explicit, but it's not extremely explicit.
Right. As far as the R rating will allow them to go. But like you said, it opens up. I know that we're not fans of his work in particular, but it also reminded me of something like The Devil's Rejects or House of a Thousand Corpses. Because you open on this farmhouse. That's where the crazy people live that kill people are, in isolated farmhouses. And what's great is it almost foreshadows Pearl right away in the first shot, because you're looking through a half-closed barn door at the house. And it almost appears, before you realize what you're looking at and what you're looking through as the camera pans back, that you're looking at a
pan and scan,
square, like almost like a TV style, old style, before anamorphic. So it looks like you're looking at an old time movie already in the first opening shots of X, but slowly pans back and you're looking from the barn at the front of the house, and then the police show up. The cop cars pull up to the front of the house, and this is so brilliant the way that they do this, because something terrible is going to happen. You already do, because you're in a horror movie.
Right.
The cops are looking at the axe in the porch. The blood is everywhere. They go into the house. They see the aftermath of what you're going to see later. And then they go into the basement and something horrifies them, but you can't see what it is just yet. Right. So you are expecting these things to be unleashed upon you as the movie goes on. So it sets up this sense of dread already. Maybe not quite John Larroquette level, but still, it does a great job of setting you up. And so when Jenny Ortega is in the basement, you're like, she's going to see what they saw, or is it her that they saw?
Right. The one thing I really liked right from the start, and we can talk about how this contrasts with Pearl, because it's obviously a very deliberate choice. The light is like slightly overexposed throughout the movie, so it looks like a late 70s, early 80s horror movie, so even the way they chose to light this, it looks vintage. It looks like it comes from that period.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what a lot of movies set in this period lack. You can still tell it's, filmed with modern techniques and modern cameras and everything else, but they try, like you said, to put it completely in that time frame.
If you're a fan of this era, and a lot of us Gen Xers who grew up watching home video releases of these 70s horror movies are fans of this era, it really feels like a legitimate film from that time. And he even uses the way he pans sometimes, the way he gets real close, and then he comes back, he gets close, and then he shoots back really quickly with the camera, and then he'll get close again. Seems like a camera technique that was really popular at that time too. So even the choices that he makes with the movement of the camera really, really make you feel like you're in this period.
Yeah. And also the really bizarre use of screen wipes that he uses here, and even split screen when it comes to Pearl, maybe a De Palma influence, who knows? But one of the first screen wipe goes to a chicken, which I thought was very Texas Chainsaw.
As film goers, we've been conditioned to sort of fear the countryside, not just in Texas Chainsaw, but even before that in Deliverance. Deliverance really set that idea that if you're an urban person who goes out into the country, there's nothing out there for you but terror and death.
Is this true? As an urban person that goes into the country, have you encountered terror and death?
Not yet experienced terror and death. Would prefer not to. Thank you. But yeah, he's playing with this trope and our expectations as film goers that, they're going to this isolated farmhouse. Nothing good is going to happen. Even without seeing the dead bodies, that nothing good is going to happen.
So this is an X-rated film troupe that are going to try to film on the down low, on the sly, on this elderly couple's property. The character of Wayne.
Martin Henderson.
Henderson.
Doing a Matthew McConaughey impression.
Exactly, because I'm like, is this like a stunt casting? Is that Matthew McConaughey? And no, it's not.
Yeah, he was totally doing an impression.
Filmed in New Zealand, by the way. You'd never know it if you didn't stick around for the credits. So he is the head of this troupe, and he's got them a location, a boarding house that's just off of this main farmhouse that somehow he found. He called the owner by the name of Howard, an older man, and Howard agreed for $30, for the bargain basement price of $30, to rent him out his boarding house for a night. Before you get there, you see a little bit of their world. You're introduced to Maxine, and I was disappointed that it didn't have 3 X's in her name when the credits rolled, like it does in the upcoming movie. It will. So you're introduced to Maxine, who wants to be a star.
This is again where the popularity of porn in the mainstream meant that she could become a star from doing porn. She could have been like a Linda Lovelace or a Marilyn Chambers, but you would never now think, I'm going to go into porn so I could be a star.
Yeah, that was a viable outlet. She needs a little bit of chemical help sometimes to get her confidence up. I think it's Wayne that tells her that she's got the X factor, that she is a star, that, well, at least she's his star. So you see a little bit of their world before they get to the farmhouse. And there's other members of the cast. Kid Cudi is playing Jackson Hole.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned before, Jenna Ortega, who we just saw in the latest Scream, another one of these Disney Channel graduates that's confounding expectations, not once but twice, first Scream and now this. So they make it to the farmhouse, and we're introduced to Howard, who looks like a beast in himself, because the camera really shies away from him.
The age of the couple is contrasted against the extreme youth and attractiveness of the rest of the cast.
This is going to come up. This is not a spoiler by any means. So if you know anything about this movie, you know that its star, Mia Goth, is playing 2 roles. So she is playing Maxine, and she is playing Pearl, who is Howard's elderly wife. Now, I don't believe I'm going to say this, but could this be considered ageist that we don't have?
Yeah, I did think about that because there's not too many roles for older people in movies to begin with.
Yes. But would anybody that age want to be in a movie like this is the question.
Well, I don't know how old the actor who plays her husband is.
So I didn't look into that. I don't know if he's a young guy with prosthetics or not. That's a good question because he's not the same actor that we see in Pearl.
No, he's
different guy.
Okay, so it's Stephen Uri played Howard. He looks like he was born in 1958. So he is younger than his character is supposed to be, for sure.
But not Mia Goth young.
Right. Yeah. So it looks like they aged him up, but not as much as for her. It is interesting to have her play that character because then obviously gives them the opportunity to have her play young Pearl in the prequel. One of the things that's interesting about this movie, and I have to say that I actually weirdly felt more sympathy for Pearl in this movie up to a point than I do in the prequel where you're supposed to be.
I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. I think the character in this movie is more sympathetic than she is. She's a bit hard to relate to in the prequel. Even though Mia Goth is brilliant, I agree. I think she is much more sympathetic in this movie because, the whole aspect of lost youth.
Yes.
And seeing this youth just paraded before her and Maxine, who looks unnervingly like Pearl did as a young woman.
There's something that I like about this movie and the way that it treats mature sexuality. This is something you don't often see in movies, right? Like a lot of times people when they're older are just treated like they're sexless, and there's this whole thing where she still has desires. She still wants to have a sexual life, which she can't have because her husband has a heart condition. And so he can't give her what she wants or what she needs. I mean, Pearl obviously has other issues because she's a murderess, but there's something really sad here about aging, about beauty. She says to Maxine at one point, there wasn't anything he wouldn't do for me back then. That's the power of beauty. It's such a significant line because it just seems like it defines so much about what Pearl is in this film. And then later she says it'll all be taken from you just like it was from me.
Once you actually see this second film, you realize how much was taken from her even before she got older.
I think that it's sort of an interesting choice to make this character kind of the villain of the piece because I think you do feel some degree of sympathy for her, at least before she starts murdering people.
Yeah. And it's a little bit of a surprise because unfortunately, I knew that there was a prequel when I saw X, so I kind of wish that I saw X a lot earlier than I did because they're really setting you up that Howard is the villain, that Howard is the murderer. And he's just there to protect his wife's interests, really.
Yeah.
Which makes me ask, why does he continue to rent out this boarding house to these bohemians if he knows they're just going to entice his wife, unless he's using them as marital aids?
And I think that's what he is doing.
They just have this game every time, and then it just culminates. I got a heart condition. Oh, okay, Pearl, this one time.
Yeah, I think that is what's happening. He's trying to lure people there that she can use because when you do have the reveal later in the basement, that guy in the basement has clearly been violated in some way because his pants are pulled down. You can use your imagination. I think that's one of the things that I like about the way that they use sexuality in this film. It's not just gratuitous. It is sort of like leading to this contrast between Pearl, who's older, who feels like her sexual life has ended, and then these young people who are so casual about their sexuality to the point where it causes a conflict right between Lorraine and RJ, because Lorraine decides she wants to participate in the porno, and RJ, who up to this point has claimed that, porn is some elevated thing and he's making this artistic movie, suddenly has a huge objection when his girlfriend wants to be in it.
Now, I think that this aspect of it was probably the most underdeveloped because of Lorraine's turnabout. Like it didn't empower her necessarily after she did it. She almost felt sorry, like immediately. That felt underdone, and I didn't really think that it fit with the rest of what was going on in here. It was almost a distraction.
I thought what was interesting though was that you could tell how curious she was when they were doing the filming. You could see it in her eyes.
I think it would have actually meant more if it was Wayne's girlfriend. I think that would have been more symbolic, where if he was the one that brought his girlfriend, his church mouse girlfriend, to do some of the behind the scenes stuff, and he was suddenly the one that was uptight with it. I think that would have been much more interesting than just poor hapless RJ. Well, like he's beaten upon like every day anyway.
I thought it was interesting only because he kept claiming that this was high art, and then suddenly it's not art when his girlfriend wants to do it. Now it's like, well, she's not like them. She's not a slut. And it was such a nice sort of touch to show her innocence. When she turns around on the bed, she has Days of the Week underpants. Right.
But that's the other thing, is that she seemed to be about to pleasure him rather than the other way around. So it's not even like
But she had expressed that she wanted to do this, and she was clearly curious, and nobody was making her. So maybe she was getting something out of that. We don't know what happened because that's one of the few scenes that's not explicit.
And that's all that you're shown. So before we even get there, I just want to also bring up a scene that I completely loved, was when Maxine like wanders off because her scene is not being shot yet. And we haven't really talked about Brittany Snow as Bobby Lynn, she's good. Yeah, she's really good. So she's filming with Jackson. This leaves Maxine with some time on her hands, so she wanders off. And she finds the pond or lake that is adjacent to the boarding house. And she, of course, decides to go for a swim. And the camera is like a bird's eye view. And this pond is just filling the screen. And you see an alligator looking at her in the weeds.
Swimming toward her.
But that's the thing is first you see a close-up of the alligator. And then you see her and you know it's there. Yeah. So you don't know what's going to happen. Then you see the bird's eye view and you see it come into frame, and she is completely unawares, and she slowly starts to swim back to the dock, and the thing is gaining more speed. And that's probably the most tense scene, I think, in the movie for me. And she's not going to die because she's the main character, but still, I think it's very effective.
Right. And that, again, he uses so many callbacks to other movies. That's your Jaws conditioning right there. You know that something is coming, and in your head you're almost like dun it's coming right up on her. She's swimming naked in the water, just like the character at the beginning of Jaws. There's a ton of callbacks to other horror movies that are like right there if you're looking for them. The scene where you see the car in the water, where it's like the car in Psycho. They play Don't Fear the Reaper, which is the reference to the original Halloween.
I always think of The Stand now when I hear that. Don't Fear the Reaper, the 94 version of The Stand.
When RJ is stabbed repeatedly by Pearl and the blood spatters on the headlight, so the whole screen turns red. And obviously this has been used in a lot of horror films, but since I just watched it on Friday, they use it in Evil Dead. The blood gets on the camera and then the whole screen turns red. So it just felt like there were a lot of callbacks to other horror films. Again, we'll talk about this when we go into Pearl, but Ty West in Pearl actually calls back to his own shots here, which is funny because the car in the water, like I said, is like a callback to Psycho. And then he calls back to the car in the water in X in Pearl. So it becomes like this origami, like folded piece, overlapping and overlapping and overlapping, with all the references.
Yes, the character of Lorraine pulls Here's Johnny at the top of the stairs. Once she finds that guy hanging down there, she flips out. And that's one of the best screams I've ever seen on film. They actually take the screen grab, and that's what you see on Amazon when you pull up X. is Jenna Ortega screaming at that. And then she runs upstairs and manages to break a hole in the door to try to unlock it from the outside. And Howard sees her, and it's terrible. This is probably, in terms of the gore, this is probably the worst scene for me, when he cuts her fingers.
I think the worst thing in the movie for me is when Wayne steps on the nail.
Yes.
I would rather watch RJ get stabbed in the neck repeatedly than watch Wayne step on that rusty nail.
That has happened to me. I have stepped on a nail just like that and had to go to the doctor. It was not fun.
It's so horrible, and you see it coming because the camera's low, and you see the nail on the ground. He's walking around outside in his underwear, helping Lorraine try to find RJ. And I don't understand, by the way, why he couldn't put on a pair of pants and shoes. Like, that just seems weird to me. Yeah, Wayne steps on the nail, which is horrible. Of course, later, like in that scene, he's looking through what appear to be almost like eye holes in the wall. I have no idea why he's doing this, by the way. Like, once you look through once, clearly there's nothing out there. Move away. But you know what's going to happen because you've seen horror movies before. You know something's coming in through those holes to get at his eyes.
Especially when you see it's a silhouette. So you see from the side. So you get the best possible angle of what is about to happen. Yeah.
And you're like, yep, his eyes are gone. And then sure enough, 2 seconds later, a pitchfork comes through and gets him right in the eyes. So,
now, let me tell you, they don't make pitchforks like this anymore.
Yeah.
Because this lasts through decades and decades. It was killing things, in
1918.
In 1918, probably previous to that as well.
Mm-hmm. So for me, when he steps on the nail, that's worse than any like actual killing in the movie. I'm like,
yeah. So RJ's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Gets the knife in the neck from Pearl.
Yeah.
Wayne steps on the nail, gets pitchfork in the eyes. Then we get, Lorraine gets locked in the basement for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get Jackson, who I mentioned before, is completely self-confident and that he can just walk around naked and have conversations.
And his silhouette tells you he has every right to be self-confident.
And then he says, I guess I'll put skivvies on and go help you look for her, because Howard shows up at the boarding house to lure another one of them out, really. Mm-hmm. He's not really looking for help to look for Pearl, but he does lure him out because Howard knows that this is the Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine, is what's said more than once here. But I don't know if that's true, because Jackson does not put 2 and 2 together at all from everything that he sees after he leaves the boarding house, because he's the one that allows you as a viewer to see that VW Beetle that's half submerged in the water. He thinks it's curious, but nothing wrong, really. He's just like, that's weird. So he feels that nothing is out of place with Howard. And so he's completely comfortable with him toting around a shotgun and having a conversation with him. So I think his Marine skills are not quite as finely honed as they once were. But yeah, he gets taken out pretty easily by Howard, who just shoots him point blank.
Yeah, that's like Jackson gets off pretty light, actually.
Yeah, in terms of what's happening to everybody else. So he's down. And then we get Bobby Lynn.
And I feel really bad for Bobby Lynn because she is kind of like this brassiness, like this, kind of overconfidence almost. But then she also has this sweetness in her, which you actually see when she sees Pearl walking around naked. And she runs out and she puts a blanket around her and she's like, let's get you inside. And she's, she seems like she's genuinely like, oh my gosh, this old person is wandering around. This is not good. She wants to help her. And then Pearl is horrible to her.
Pearl feeds Bobby Lynn to the alligator.
Mm-hmm. Which we discover in the second movie that Pearl has taught this alligator that to come when she calls, basically.
So, and as we said, Bobby Lynn was just trying to help the old girl out. Yeah.
Trying to be a nice person. This is what you get.
Yeah. And this leaves Maxine alone in the boarding house.
who we should go back a second, rewind a second. So the reason why Pearl is outside naked is because she has actually, just previous to this, actually gotten into bed with the sleeping Maxine and touched her body. And it felt almost like a coveting, like she just wanted that kind of youth that Maxine has. And then Maxine screams and Pearl goes out. And then Bobby Lynn wakes up. And this is when they realize all the guys are gone. Let me tell you, though, these people sleep very soundly. Because if someone was in bed with me, touching me, I would wake up.
You got the shotgun blast going off.
Right.
It's not that far from the boarding house.
Pearl keeps saying that there's something special about Maxine. And again, it's this sort of like distorted mirror thing where she really sees herself in Maxine. It's kind of interesting as like you sort of hurtle toward the denouement and Maxine's trying to get out of here. She sees RJ's body. She's going toward the house. She hears Lorraine trying to get out of the basement. And she's already hidden from Pearl and Howard under the bed.
That's a really uncomfortable scene, by the way, because Howard finally relents to Pearl. He keeps saying, "Oh, my heart, my heart. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." And then the camera pans down as they start to do their business in Maxine's bed. Camera pans down because they can't find her.
Yeah.
Under the bed the whole time. And she manages to sneak out because they're otherwise occupied.
Right. So then she goes to the house and she's looking for the keys to the truck so that she can get out of there. And she comes upon Lorraine. She lets her out and Lorraine is like, "I'm getting out of here. I don't want anything to do with you.
I hate you. It's all your fault."
Yeah. And she starts running out. And of course, Howard and Pearl are back at this point.
Of course. Yep. They can't just get away scot-free. This is one of those things where if it's a movie that I'm really into, I know how it ends and I know how it's going to go. But as many times as I see a Dawn of the Dead or anything else like that, I always think, and I've said this before, maybe it'll turn out differently. Maybe Howard and Pearl won't show up and they'll be able to get away, the both of them.
Certainly not in a film like this where he's so obviously showing you the tropes of horror movies. So Howard and Pearl are actually moving the bodies. Howard shoots Lorraine and then Howard has a heart attack.
Because Lorraine gurgles.
Yeah.
Everything else that's happened has not set this man's heart off.
Yes. This is the tipping point.
The way that it's filmed is kind of like a jump scare because it kind of makes you jump as the viewer as well. And sure enough, it's enough to send Howard into cardiac arrest right there. And
Pearl is in a full-blown panic, asking Maxine to help her. Maxine's like, "No, you're not going to help you." She thinks she's going to shoot Pearl. And there was actually a reference to this way back at the beginning. Howard had come to the door with the shotgun and waved it around when Wayne first showed up. And then he tells Wayne, "Oh, actually, I don't have it loaded." And Wayne said, "I have a pistol in my glove compartment and that's not loaded either. Like it's just for show." Maxine has gotten the pistol.
And she doesn't know that.
And she doesn't know that. And she thinks she's going to take out Pearl. And she dramatically holds the gun up and then click, click, click. There's nothing there. And then Pearl stands up and tries to shoot Maxine with the shotgun. But Pearl is so old, frail, and light, the shotgun kick launches her out the door.
Yep. And I'm sure, like behind the scenes, she was probably yanked, you know, on cords, like through that door, full flight. And she breaks a hip
because she's so frail.
Yeah.
And this is when she becomes completely unhinged. she starts screaming at Maxine. She's calling her names, all this stuff. Maxine gets in the truck, and I'm like, she's gonna run her over. Sure enough, she runs her over. That takes care of that. No villain
runs her over egregiously, by the way. Like you would run over a ripe watermelon, because that's what Pearl's head looks like. Now, this is all the more heartbreaking because I know the next movie is Maxine's story and not Pearl's story. But the fact that this is coming to an end the way that it is, and especially after this journey that you've been on and you feel such sympathy for her, it's kind of sad. It's a sad ending for her. Even though she's going into crazy town, you're not innocent, you're not special, you'll end up like me. And Maxine is not having that. She's not hearing that.
I think though, it's like for me, I really felt sympathy for Pearl sort of up to a point. And then as, you lose sympathy. And obviously we'll go into this when we talk about the second movie, but in the second film, I had less sympathy for her, for who she was in that movie, and we'll get into why.
Now, let me ask you this. Was it just me, or did Lorraine, after she got shot, look just like Evil Ash from Army of Darkness?
I can't say that I noticed that, but
Sully Forth. Sully Forth.
Sully Forth.
Well, I think it warrants a third viewing. So, Ty West, director here. Now, again, wearing his influences on his sleeve, which I can very much appreciate. As we said previous, you and I are both fans of all the films that he is calling back to. And I really love that Pearl is a different animal than this. They're almost two completely different approaches to the same character. X, again, being the more conventional horror movie of these two films. It was released theatrically in March of this year on a $1 million budget, which seems crazy.
I am really impressed, especially when you see at the end that the prosthetics were done by Weta Workshop, and then you got to figure how much of the budget went to the prosthetics.
I know. I was just joking that Harry Styles' character was washing dishes for Chris Pine's Frank last week. I think that's what they were doing here for Weta Workshop.
But yeah, and also $1 million budget for Pearl. So for both of these films, are done on what amounts to a micro budget today.
Yeah.
Just incredibly.
I almost feel that that's wrong. X has made 14 million. So, not a huge super hit by like a Marvel standard, but when you compare it to its budget, that's pretty amazing. It made 14 times what it cost.
Yeah. And I think that the original Halloween cost like $700,000 in like $1976. So Halloween had a huge budget compared to this. And we always think of Halloween as a low budget film.
Yeah. I just thought it was funny that the movie that they're filming, the film within a film, is called The Farmer's Daughter, which was actually a porno film starring Spalding Gray. What? I mean, what did Wallace Shawn appear in this as well? What is going on here? 1976, the actual movie came out. And I thought that this was a little fun fact. I guess when they go to the gas station and they get a carton of milk, at some point there's a carton of milk in here. They actually put the actor who plays the dead body in the basement as a missing person on the carton of milk. But the funny thing is they didn't actually started doing that on cartons of milk until 1984. So
yeah, there's a little timeline issue in Pearl also, which we'll talk about.
Okay,
but one touch I did like was that throughout this, there is this evangelist TV show kind of playing in the background
from the beginning, because when the cops show up, the TV's on.
Yeah. And you sort of see it intermittently throughout, and you just think it's sort of a heavy-handed metaphor, the contrast of the evangelist talking about the sinners and all this stuff. But then it turns out at the end, Maxine is actually the daughter of this evangelist. And he's talking about how she was tempted into sin.
And that is a genuine clutch the pearls moment.
Mm-hmm.
No pun intended. Yeah, Maxine, at the very end, you see her final girl driving away, and that's when you're cutting back to the reveal on this televangelist broadcast. Coincidence that it's on the TV of Howard and Pearl, or not?
I think not.
That looks like you, Pearl. So are we ready for buckets on X?
Yeah, I think so. So I definitely admire this. I don't know if it's necessarily something I would go back and watch over and over. I mean, I've seen it a couple times already, but I don't know if it's something that like I would return to. So I would say like 3 3/4.
That's funny. That's exactly what I am going to give it as well. I think it's more susceptible to repeat viewing because of Pearl. I think that really elevates it. The two of them together, I think, elevates X. Even though I think by itself it is, a genuine love letter to 70s horror. And I thought it was funny, and I thought it was engaging and unique. But I think Pearl really manages to elevate it. And we will discuss why once we get back from the concession stand.
The haunted mansion at Long Branch is a living, breathing nightmare of more than 30 incredible rooms, each with its own very special surprise. Wander through its myriad of secret passageways and winding labyrinths. Discover the graveyard of the living dead and its unimagined terror. There's Renfield and his spiders, the Prince of Darkness, Count Dracula, and many more. At the haunted mansion at Long Branch, it's waiting for you.
Toys R Us has the Big Bird Halloween costume and the Yoda Halloween costume for trick-or-treating.
Okay, we're back and we are talking Pearl. Now, this apparently was filmed hot on the heels of filming X, so much so that they just utilized the same sets. I'm surprised that the entire cast didn't return from X. That would have been neat. I thought that would have been even playing, different characters.
If you had, that sort of parallel.
Yeah.
But the contrast between the look of this film and the look of X, and I think that's what really just sort of elevates both films, is that you see the choices that he made for this film. This is like a Technicolor dream.
It is from the font of the opening titles, the huge score that comes up underneath those titles. And even they go as far at the beginning, they don't sustain it, but like they have some graininess, scratchiness to the film at the beginning. I would have loved it if they kept that all the way through, but they don't go there.
Pearl starts out in a very similar way to Maxine, where she has these dreams of becoming a star. She's a dancer. She wants to leave the farm where she feels trapped. Her parents are German. It's World War I, and there's some discrimination in the community against them because they're German. And her father has been ill and is now an invalid. They're very, very trapped on this farm, her and her mother, partially by her father, partially by the need to sustain the farm because all the farm hands have gone away to war. So you start off feeling, again, kind of some sympathy toward her because she wants a bigger life and she can't get that bigger life. But something is wrong with Pearl, and you see this from the get-go because she kills the goose.
Oh, let's talk about this. But she also, before we get there, she does, the dance in her mother's dress. This idyllic moment that she has is interrupted by her mother barking at her, where did you get that? Why are you wearing that? But she's doing the same movements that she does at the end of X. So there's no question that this is the same character. But then she goes into the barn as you say, and it's like a Technicolor dream. The colors are so vivid in this movie. Everything is so bright and clean because you see the same shot of the farmhouse from that same angle that you did at the beginning of X, but everything is nice and new and painted and fresh as the day that it was born.
Even the room that she's in, so again that this is Pearl's room. In X, there's like all these kind of rotted dolls, like aged things, and they're all still there in Pearl, but they're all new. Everything is new and shiny.
And when she like jauntily almost comes skipping into the barn, this could be like Snow White. She could have like birds coming down and lighting on her shoulders because she's talking to the cow. She's even got animal friends that just stop short of talking back to her. What's the cow's name? Charlie?
Charlie.
It's all sweetness and light until Mr. Deuce appears in the doorway. What is up with this goose? Because it comes up like Donald Duck. Hello, Mr. Deuce. And she suddenly takes a turn. I'm like, what is the issue between these two? First of all, I'd like to know that backstory. That should get its own prequel. After being all kind and sweetness and light to these other animals, Mr. Deuce comes in and she pitchforks him. Because you may have thought that you've walked into a Disney film up to this point. She pitchforks the goose. She brings it down to the pond. Same dock from X.
Yeah.
She holds it out and boom, it's a beautiful freeze frame when the alligator jumps out of the water to snatch it, and then boom, then you have the main title. My first thought, I am going to like this. From that point, I was in. From that opening title sequence of that alligator coming out of the water. And it does take a while to get going, I will say, but it needs that time to kind of reveal the layers in Pearl unraveling, because she doesn't really go into crazy town until towards the end of the movie. So some may think that it's a slow road getting there, but I enjoyed it thoroughly all the way through.
I mean, I think that, again, you're supposed to sympathize with her. You're supposed to feel like she's been trapped. Like, her mother treats her like a child, even though she's married.
Yeah, that's revealed that Howard is away. He's kind of abandoned her. The other reveal is that he's from a wealthy family.
He's wealthy, but he chose to come and be a farmhand, which is how she met him. And then he went away to war. So she really feels like he was supposed to be her ticket out of this life that she hated. And then he went away to Europe to fight. And even before that, he wanted to stay on the farm. He wanted to be a farmer. And she's like, I don't want to be a farmer. She wanted pretty much everything else but this. To talk about the little timeline problem, when she goes to the film in town, it's supposed to be 1918. There were no talkies in 1918. She wouldn't have heard the music playing over the film like that. It was funny because I thought that immediately. I was like,
I thought that as well. I was like, shouldn't there be somebody playing piano in the theater instead of her hearing it through speakers or whatever?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And then my son leaned over to me and he said, "What year did Steamboat Willie come out?" And I was thinking of the same thing. But yeah, because short film talkies become popular around 1923. And then you have The Jazz Singer, which is the first full length in 1927. So this is way too early for that. It was a little jarring. It just, if you know anything about film history, you're like, that's not right.
Yeah. I don't think it would have taken it away from it if they had like a piano player.
I don't think so either.
She still would have been seeing the same image,
Yeah.
But odd choice. That's not like they didn't know, because if you knew, then you know that they know. But,
yeah. It's not a deal breaker, it's just something. I was like, that's not right. I also kind of found interesting, so she goes into town to get her father's medicine, which is just a bottle of morphine. She drinks some of it while she's in the theater, and I thought of that as a little callback back to Maxine's sort of casual use of cocaine to sort of pep herself up. So again, always kind of drawing those parallels, I think, back to Maxine's character in X. And there's a lot of scenes throughout this. In X, there's an X-rated scene of Maxine in the porn film as milking the cow, and she's wearing like these overalls and she's got nothing on underneath them, and she has a little handkerchief in her hair. And in this, he has a callback exact same angle with Pearl, except she's dressed like a farm girl, in her overalls and shirt, and she's wearing the same handkerchief, and she's sitting on the same bucket milking the cow, sort of same angle. So again, you sort of start to see that origami overlap.
Right. But again, it couldn't be more different, the two movies, even though they've got a lot of parallels going on. When the druggist tells her 2 bits, of course, my mind had to go to morphine for daddy. 2 bits.
Roger Rabbit.
Roger Rabbit, yep.
She obviously is dreaming of becoming a movie star. She thinks that, if she can just get in front of the right person, that'll be her ticket out of here. And the film projectionist at this theater demonstrates some interest in her, which you know what that means.
Yes, you do. Any interest is not on the up and up here. And this guy, as nice as the movie tries to paint him as being up front, if a stranger is trying to show you pornography, he is not inherently a good person.
Right. It's not an innocent choice where he's like, let me show you this film from Europe.
Yeah. Oh, look what I have here. So yeah, I didn't like this guy. I was waiting for this guy to get it and get it. He does before the end of the movie. I will say for him, it was cool that he gives her a little frame of the celluloid of the film to take home, which she loses.
Which leads to an erotic encounter with a scarecrow.
Yeah. So we're talking about different homages to other films. This one, obviously, rather than 70s horror, is leaning towards those classic films. There's a lot of Wizard of Oz imagery in here, especially here. Not only because there's a scarecrow, but, just her with her pigtails, riding the bike back and forth.
The fields of very yellow corn.
Yeah.
It's really the brightness of the film more than anything, I think, that really makes you think of Wizard of Oz. She wants something that she can't get. Her husband is away, and she lives in a very intense fantasy world.
She projects on the scarecrow, the projectionist.
Yes.
In outrage, she starts screaming at the scarecrow, I'm married. And she's the one that's knocked him off his perch.
Yes. So the bulk of the film is sort of taken up with this struggle that she has with her mother. Her mother is a very sad character. Yes, she's very strict. Yes, she's like overbearing, but she doesn't physically abuse Pearl or anything. And she's trying to, I think, to accustom her to the realities of the world. She's like, you're not going to be able to go off and become a dancer and become a movie star. She's like, this is your life here, and I need you to help me. And Pearl is just resentful of it. But her mother is incredibly sad because her husband he can't speak, he can't communicate in any way. Pearl at one point sort of pokes his face and is like, are you in there?
And he doesn't give any indication in that scene, but at the end you see the terror in his eyes. So he is still aware of what's going on.
That scene, and I think we can jump ahead a little bit to sort of the point where Pearl really starts to turn. She has an argument with her mother, which her father witnesses, and you can see how frightened he is in that moment. Her mother slaps her. She slaps her mother back. They start fighting. Her mother is set on fire, which is horrible. And then Pearl throws boiling water on her to put her out, which is not an improvement. And then she throws her mother in the basement, still alive.
Still alive, yeah.
Just horrible. And then she dresses herself up and runs off and has a night with the projectionist.
While her father is still stuck
at the table,
at the dining room table. Now, also previously, she's cleaning her father, bathing her father in his chair. And when she's poking him in the, are you still in there? At one point, she actually starts to choke him to the point where he can't breathe. And then she stops herself.
It's really at this point where if you had any sympathy for her, you lose it because her father is helpless. He can't help his condition, and she just obviously sees him as a burden that she has to free herself of. When she returns home with the projectionist, she seems initially contrite. She's like, "Oh, Daddy, I'm sorry I left you here." And he looks so scared of what's happened. And then she sort of presents him as a prop, like, "This is my daddy." And then she's like, "Let's go upstairs to my bedroom." And the projectionist starts to be like, "Something is wrong." He's kind of like, "What's wrong with you?"
She just wants to be accepted, and that she doesn't want anybody to look at her as different. The projectionist rightfully does. He also hears, when they're up in her room and they start kissing, he hears pounding from downstairs, which is the mom who's still alive. And he's like, "I'm out of here at this point." So he tries to leave. Pearl is able to walk all the way around the car without him knowing that she's there when he gets it, as he's trying to get away with a pitchfork, by the way.
And then, she kills him and she puts the car in the pond, again, just like at the exact same angle of the car in X, and almost the exact same place in the pond. So there's always those kind of little callbacks.
The projectionist leaves her with the advice, make the most of what you have, which comes back. And again, that's another callback to the Wizard of Oz. There's no place like home, which eventually is what she realizes she has, is that's all that she's got. But we're leading up to Mia Goth's signature scene in here, which is, we haven't really talked about this audition that's been building up towards this moment. Because the projectionist, once he shows her this stag film, he's like, "You should go to Europe. That's where all this stuff is happening. This is where artists go." So she has it in her head that she needs to go to Europe. And she thinks that this audition that her sister-in-law has come and told her about is her ticket out, is that she's going to go on this tour, and then it's just up and out from that point on. So she is hinging everything on this audition. So in her head, she's getting, she's done with her parents. They're taken care of. She is going to go to this audition, and then her life is sorted. You kind of know where this is going beforehand, unfortunately. So you see them outside the church, because it's like a church troupe of dancers or something that's going to go on tour. And all these girls are coming out of the audition in tears, one by one. She's out there with Mitzi, her sister-in-law. Mitzi's like, tells her that she's too nervous to go first. So she switches spots with Pearl, who goes in. And this is like a huge set piece where she goes in and starts to dance, and all these backup dancers come up behind her. And then there's the backdrop of World War I. And I thought this was fabulous. I was expecting the lights to go down and the judges all like standing up and giving a round of applause, but that doesn't happen. It's not what they're looking for.
They're looking for someone a little more blonde. Then, because Mitzi is sort of small and blonde and perky. And again, with the parallels back to Bobby Lynn, sort of seems like she has a genuine sweetness in her, because she's nothing but kind to Pearl.
Yeah, she's not jealous or competitive with her in the line or anything.
Pearl is devastated, beyond devastated.
She breaks down on stage, and like the woman there is like, "Don't make this worse, don't make this worse than it is, please." She goes nuts on stage.
Yeah,
because it's despair. It's palpable despair.
And she's screaming, "I'm supposed to be a star," and then she's sitting behind the church and she's crying. I wouldn't even say crying, she's wailing. She's screaming, because this thing that she was so certain would happen didn't happen. And then Mitzi hides from her that she, in fact, did get the part.
She does it really well, because I was questioning whether she got the part or not. Because she's like, "Pearl, I didn't get the part." And I'm like, did she? And now she's just lying because that's what Pearl wants to hear, that she got the part. I don't know if she got it or not.
But they go back to the house, and at this point, now Mitzi doesn't know this, but I mean, there's a few things that are wrong here. Mitzi and her mother had brought them a pig earlier, which Pearl's mother had refused out of pride, saying that she didn't take charity. So the pig has been slowly rotting on the porch, which is just a very jarring note as you see it decomposing. So Mitzi's like, you should talk to me like you talk to Howard. And Pearl Mia Goth gives this incredible monologue. Pearl's internal life over a course of like about 3 or 4 minutes. It's pretty long, I think.
It is. And it is one shot. Well, maybe there's a couple of cheats. Maybe there's a couple of times where it goes back to Mitzi, but there are long stretches where it's just her, and she reveals everything, to Mitzi, and to the point where you're hoping it cuts back to Mitzi because you want to see her reaction from this stuff that Pearl is talking about.
Yeah, but you don't see it until the end.
Yeah.
And Mitzi has this, because Pearl has revealed her infidelity to Howard. She's revealed the murder. She's revealed like all these things inside her that she says that she wishes weren't there, but they are. She was just born this way. And when she finishes, Mitzi just has this frozen face. That face is someone who's like, I don't know what I should do with my face right now, And then she's like, well, I have to be getting home.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that's when Mitzi says, and I thought that she was truthful, that, I know you got the part. And then she says, Pearl, I didn't get the part. Like she says it in a way where I thought she was telling the truth. And then she starts to saying, yeah, I did. But I'm thinking because she's scared and she knows that that's what Pearl wants to hear.
Right. So, because Pearl says, you're not going to tell anybody about this, are you? And it's the way that Pearl says it where you're like, get out right now. Stop.
Take those damn heels off.
Yeah.
And then go.
Because this is the Agatha Christie rule, which is murder begets murder, right? You have to keep murdering in order to protect yourself from the discovery of the other murders. She's confessed everything to Mitzi, so there's only one end for Mitzi here, and unfortunately it involves an ex.
So this is such a great sequence as well, because Mitzi is freaking out and she's made it off the porch and she's in the driveway, and you're thinking, well, maybe she's got a good head start, so maybe she can make it. But no, she's got to run in heels down the gravel driveway, as in the same shot you see Pearl also come out and grab the axe
in her red dress.
Mitzi starts to run. Pearl's not running.
Yeah.
She's just waiting for Mitzi to fall in her heels, which she does. And then she gets it in the back.
Yeah. And again, it just seems so sad. It's like, she was always so sweet to you. She was like, we sister-in-laws have to stick together. And Pearl's jealousy is so intense. And she just feels that Mitzi is a person of privilege who's always gotten what she wanted, and that she herself has never gotten anything that she's wanted. And in this moment, Mitzi just represents all of her resentment.
And so this is where maybe I would, in Pearl's monologue, she reveals that she's killed things before. This is what you see in the movie has not been the start of it. For all intents and purposes, as the viewer, you could think that it was the start of it. You weren't privy to any of this. She could have snapped when she hit Mr. Deuce with the pitchfork. But no, she reveals that she starts with animals and she enjoys killing things. Maybe because they were trying to paint her in a sympathetic light, that they're not revealing this until later. But you can tell that she tries to hide it from everyone. And again, going back to the projectionist in her room, why did you go cold on me? What did you see? She's trying to hide this from everybody and she can't anymore. And that's the monologue. Yeah. Like almost it's a relief for her to let it all out to Mitzi. But of course, now that she's done that, it's a death sentence for her.
And the thing is that when you go back to that fight with her mom does say that she has seen the bad things in her.
Yeah.
So this look that she's talking about, she's been getting it every day from her mother, who recognizes that there's something wrong in her daughter, and she's trying in some way to be corrective, to think that she thinks if she just gives Pearl like kind of a disciplined life, that these impulses will go away, but it's not. She was born this way. But then Pearl feels, that she just wants love in some way. So she sets up a nice family dinner with her dead mother and her dead father and the rotting pig.
This is really disturbing. The final scene. This goes into crazy town. And this is also a bit of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes.
So
the
it's
scene,
not, it's not completely separated from X in that regard. And she's setting this up for Howard for his homecoming because this is really her last option because she's so terrified. She wants to please him so much. She doesn't want him to look at her like the projectionist did, like her mother did, like that there's something wrong with her. Because she says to Mitzi as Howard, I'm scared you'll come home and you'll be scared, like they were. And so that's what, when she presents this dinner, and then, she's not sitting at the table. Howard is looking around. He's horrified, right? Because he's still in his uniform and he's like, I'm home. And he drops his bags and he's got this nightmare scene to look at. And then he turns around and Pearl is in the kitchen, the biggest smile on her face. Like, are you happy?
Holding the pitcher of lemonade. And this scene where Ty West holds on her face so long, it's excruciating.
Yes, because you can tell as the minutes tick by, it's starting to get harder and harder for her to hold that face.
Yes.
Because it suddenly is no longer a genuine smile. It's a fake smile as the credits go on. Like she's making an effort to hold it.
And right at the end, she starts to cry a little bit.
Yes.
But she's got this huge toothy grin, this, almost cinema star grin that she's holding for so long and looking at him so hopefully. And the camera just holds on her face until finally it shrinks.
It shrinks
down.
The little circle down, and then she doesn't have to smile anymore.
But the ending is just like, it's hurting you.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Her.
But it's not like you're thinking, okay, Mia Goth has to hold this smile. It makes sense that Pearl is trying to please Howard and by trying to indicate that everything is normal, but it's not because it's a fake smile as it's revealed as the minutes go on. So this is the kind of thing that I think about when you talk about taking a swing for the fences.
Yeah.
Like that ending specifically, and just the whole conceit of this being the movie being of a time period and making an effort to be of a time period, just like X was, but in a very different way. So this is probably going to come off wrong, but I had fun watching this because of that. I was invested in the story, but I was so appreciative of what was being presented to me at the same time.
Yeah, I really like the look of this film. Especially if you contrast it with X, but it does just show such a really clever sensibility, that he's doing something so different with this than he does with the first film. And Mia Goth's amazing. She's amazing.
Because you're sitting there watching her smile until it goes to black. I wasn't expecting there to be a post-credits sequence at all. So I got up to leave and I was at the end of my row, and then suddenly something else comes on and I just sat right back down. It wasn't much. You just get like the Hollywood sign, but it spells out Maxine, and it takes place in the 80s because it looks like it's from old videotape with bad tracking.
Yeah, just to make sure that that there's one more chapter here.
There's another movie coming, yes. And I was mistaken. I, for some reason, thought that they filmed all three of them back to back, but I don't think that they've made Maxine yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, that these two films will come out in such close succession. You don't normally get that. The X was only released a few months ago.
Yeah.
In Hollywood terms.
So A24 had to commit to this sight unseen with Pearl. So, a lot was riding on X. Would anybody, be interested in seeing Pearl?
Yeah, and I think Pearl just does feel very unique in sort of the whole pantheon of horror films. It just doesn't really feel like anything else you've seen before.
Definitely. Definitely. It is unique. And I just, maybe about a week before I saw it, I saw some comment from Martin Scorsese praising Pearl and Mia Goth in particular, saying that he went home that night after seeing Pearl and he couldn't sleep because it disturbed him so much.
Yeah, you definitely walk away feeling disquieted.
Yes,
sure.
that final scene is extremely disturbing and nightmarish, and it does stick with you. So, Jeff, I think you were right. As Christina mentioned at the onset of this episode, to skip this one. Again, $1 million budget. Amazingly, even more so, I think, than X, that this only cost $1 million. So far, Pearl has made $8.6 million. Again, compared to its budget, that's a pretty decent showing.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is one of those films, a lot like Mandy, where people will go to see it and they'll tell other people, you need to go and see it. And then there'll be this real word of mouth building up. Like Music Box, we saw it yesterday, so a few weeks after its initial release, and the Music Box is still showing it a few times a day. And the showing we went to at 4:30, there were quite a lot of people in the theater. So I definitely feel like this is a word of mouth type of film where people are going to say, "Oh, you really need to go and see this."
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not playing locally anymore. When I saw it, it was like at the very end of its run. It was only playing at one showing per night. And there was probably 6 people in the theater, including me, which was 5 people more than I was expecting to be in there. But yeah, this is definitely, and it's too bad if you're in an area that's not showing this in a theater anymore, because I think this is definitely a big screen experience. And let me tell you, I didn't mention this before, but I think this scarecrow wishes he had more than just a brain after that particular scene. Okay, what kind of buckets would we give Pearl?
So I'm going to give Pearl a quarter more, I think, because of its inventiveness. I'm going to say 4.
I'm going to go just a tad higher. I'm going to say 4.25 for me. I really appreciated it. I enjoyed it. And I think it's going to be seen as a hallmark of horror. So too. I think people are going to laud this for years and years to come. And I think we were lucky to be able to see it in its initial run on the big screen.
Like I said, this was a film I would have gone to see anyway, so I'm glad that you had a chance to see it.
So I think Maxine has a lot to live up to after Pearl. So hopefully he can pull it out again.
I'm wondering so much, though, what he could still have to say about that character, because X is kind of her movie. So I'm just curious to see where he's going to go.
Will it be like a prequel for that character? Now that you know the reveal that Minister or whoever was her father. I
don't know. I mean, obviously we'll see. But yeah, this is a lot to live up to for sure.
Do we have any idea when the ETA for Maxine is? 2024, maybe?
No, I bet it comes out next year.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if it came out in 2024, because he's already proved he can do a lot with a small budget and do it quickly.
Quickly. Hopefully, yeah. Okay, so what else did we do this week?
Well, I've been watching these 80s horror films on Criterion. I have yet to watch one that actually was scary, but the other night I asked you guys if I should watch Wolfen, They Keep, or Road Games, and I did end up watching Wolfen that night, and I watched Road Games a couple nights later. I had seen Wolfen, but not for a long, long time. It has a couple of suspenseful moments. It's a little long. It's sort of capitalizing on this like Native American legends / burial ground trope that sort of becomes a thing. Actually, I learned this really recently. The first time this trope appears is in Amityville Horror, the Native American burial ground thing.
It was kind of for a while, especially in the early 80s, that was like your go-to explanation.
Yes, you would always fall back on that. So it'd be like after Amityville Horror, it becomes a thing that's sort of used over and over. Obviously, Stephen King used it in Pet Sematary, and like that's sort of the subplot of Wolfen, that they've disturbed the spirits, and that like these Native American people can trade their souls with the wolves, and the wolves will defend the place. Unfortunately, Edward James Olmos plays the sort of main Native American character, so it's a little offensive that the filmmakers clearly thought one brown person was interchangeable with any other brown person. It's not too bad, actually. It's like I said, it's got a few suspenseful moments. It goes on a little long. The message is a little overdone in the end. And then a couple nights later, I watched Road Games, which I had never seen.
Is Stacy Keach in that?
Stacy Keach and Jamie Lee Curtis is sort of billed really big for the, like, clearly she was a selling point for this movie, but she's actually not in it that much. It's mostly him. And it's a movie about, he's a truck driver in the Australian outback, and there's a serial killer. And the serial killer has actually sort of been using his identity. And he, like, sort of, all the evidence ends up sort of pointing toward him as the killer, but he knows it's this guy in the green van. Not scary. Like, not really at all. It was sort of fun. Like, it had a kind of fun cleverness to it. And Stacy Keach is actually pretty good at keeping your attention because he's by himself for long stretches of this movie. But I mean, it's not scary. You start to feel a little suspense at the end. I actually thought they would have a twist where he actually got blamed. And I was like, well, that would actually elevate this movie if he, you know, sort of was like the innocent caught in the, you know, the wiles of the serial killer, but they do get him right at the end.
Okay.
So kind of worth seeing as an artifact if you come across it. But I did skip the keep because you said it was terrible.
Yes.
Because it's a Michael Mann movie. I didn't think it could be irredeemable, but you said it was horrible. So I thought, well, I'll pass on that right now.
Well, the main, it's kind of worth viewing as a curiosity. And I did enjoy it as a kid, but that's because I read the book before I went to go see it. So I was completely keyed up for it. And it was such a disappointment compared to the book. It's kind of like the thing with Barlow in Salem's Lot, how in the book he's kind of like a, you know, like a Dracula, a very human vampire, where in the Tobe Hooper, brilliantly, I have to say, because the Barlow in Salem's Lot, the TV movie, is like the stuff of nightmares. He's like a beast. So they did the same thing with The Keep. The main villain here is human in the book. In the movie, he's like this Skeletor looking thing, which didn't work. And it's very disjointed. So I don't think you would like it. I don't want to say don't watch it. You know, it's.
But the interesting thing is that I saw the note on the Criterion channel is that Michael Mann's original cut was 210 minutes long. So you're saying it was disjointed. Clearly, a lot of the film was chopped up by the studio, which was like you're not releasing an almost 4-hour movie.
Right. Scott Glenn's in it, so
yeah.
So maybe there's some things. Maybe, you know, you give it a shot for 15 minutes, and then you can always turn it off if you don't like it.
It's true. The thing is there's so many horror movies in Criterion right now that, like, you don't want to get caught in that thing where you're just scrolling like, oh, I don't know what to pick, you know. So I try to like narrow it down to a few before I sit down so I can kind of move in, go, okay, I'm just gonna watch this. Otherwise you're just looking at the, you know, the caption for every movie, like, oh, should I watch this one? Oh, maybe I should watch this one.
Speaking of that, I did something similar this week. You have Criterion Channel and I have Shudder. So I'm always looking on a weekly basis because Shudder's always adding new movies. Either it's a Shudder original or it's vintage movies that some of them I've never even heard of. There was one that just appeared on Shudder this week that I've heard of before, but never seen it. And it's called May. It's from 2003. And it just seemed weird that I was watching this in the same week that I watched Pearl, because it's contemporary. So it's about a young woman who's an assistant in a veterinarian's office who goes crazy. And there's so many parallels with Pearl because it's a disturbed young woman who wants people to see her as normal and not crazy. Jeremy Sisto is in this, who a lot of people know from 6 Feet Under. She becomes obsessed with him, and Anna Faris is in this as well, who works with her in the vet's office. So she becomes obsessed with various people's body parts. So she's telling Jeremy Sisto every time they go out on a date that he has beautiful hands. But she is so off-putting and doesn't know how to act around people, he drops her very quickly, as does everyone else in her life. So towards the end of the movie, she makes like a Frankenstein monster out of the different body parts that she's admiring. And she wants this being, which is just a corpse sewn together, to see her as a normal person. That's just putting this in a nutshell. But the fact that I saw this within 24 hours of seeing Pearl is just like a kismet kind of a thing.
Yeah,
just
just
like
weird.
they were very similar plot lines going on. Pearl was much more effective, by the way. So that's pretty much what I did. And I also watched something that hopefully we'll discuss in a couple of weeks, something called Werewolf by Night, which just dropped on Disney Plus. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
Not yet.
Not yet?
No, and we have so much to get caught up on because we still have not watched any episode and or just like getting my whole family coordinated has been a pain this last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Disney Plus, this will feed into what we're doing next week. Now, this is kind of like a double shot of two movies from the same franchise. It wasn't a franchise until this year, actually. Hocus Pocus and Hocus Pocus 2. So we're doubling down on Hocus Pocus.
Interesting discussion, I think, because as I talked about last week, I saw this movie in the theater and have watched it every year since it came out. You had never seen it before.
No.
And Jeff was at least familiar with it, but wasn't like one of his favorite movies. So I think it's going to be interesting to talk about this in that context with all of us having such extremely different experiences of this movie.
And again, you know, as we get further into October, we're trying to keep that Halloween theme. The month will culminate eventually with Halloween Ends, the way that we've programmed this October. So stay tuned. All you Hocus Pocus fans out there, tell your friends that we're finally discussing Hocus Pocus next week. So thank you again for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. If you like what you just heard, be sure to follow TMI Confessionals of the Nerd Kind on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or whatever you listen to your favorite podcasts on. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and then share it with your fellow movie nerd friends. It means the world to us and helps our listenership grow.
You can also find us on all of the socials, Instagram and Twitter at TMI_podcast 2018. We're on Facebook and YouTube as well. Just look for the Popcorn Bucket.
You can help support this show by visiting our TeePublic page for some TMI branded goodies such as hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, and stickers. TeePublic.com/TMI Confessionals, all one word.
A 5-star review would be incredibly nice as well. I'm just saying.
Thanks again for listening. We truly appreciate you. Be sure to come back next week. We'll save some popcorn for you.
I was still here, but this time you froze.
From my point of view, you froze.
Okay.
So not sure what happened there. This episode is cursed. We should hurry up.
Yeah, I know. Sally forth.
Sally forth.